Sufjan Stevens, Javelin album review. Let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning, here tonight to chat about this latest album from Mr. Sufjan Stevens, indie darling, Detroit-based singer-songwriter. You know who he is, probably. He's been at it since the early 2000s. And during the time, he was dropping albums like A Sun Came and Enjoy Your Rabbit. And at the time, I was not buying in. I mean, yeah, there's some good tracks here and there, but these albums are bloated as is, and the lo-fi production did not do Sufjan a lot of justice at the time. I still don't like them. I've tried, but around the time of his Michigan album, I fell in love overnight. This, to me, was like turning the light bulb on when it came to Sufjan's music. Like, overnight, I became obsessed with his songwriting, his very tender performances. Not only that, just how creative he was getting with the sounds that he was using. And while he did not, finish his 50 States project, which I didn't expect him to, I thought this was a great, real first tremendous album for Sufjan. I really did love his Seven Swans album that came out shortly after. It's just so lonely and well performed. It's just so good, and Illinois it really does deserve all the hype that it's getting. It's definitely one of his most creative projects. It's truly a spectacle, and it's worth the hype. Now, after that, I did fall into a little lull with Sufjan's music for a while. I did enjoy The Age of Odds when it came out. I loved the hell out of this thing, but these days, I don't know. I'm not really feeling it when I go back and listen to it. He was also dropping a bunch of EPs and B-sides collections around this time that I wasn't clinging towards anymore. And so much so that I did not listen to Carrie and Lowell when it first came out. And I'm an idiot for that, because it really is just a truly remarkable project. I mean, hearing Sufjan go into autobiographical mode, but just keep everything that made him who he was so far, it just makes for just an absolutely gut punch of an album. Now, since then, Sufjan's been a busy boy, from music for movies that he's put out, collaborative albums, also that really middle of the road indie-tronic and folk-tronic album The Ascension, which I was not a big fan of, even if Video Games is still a banger. Now, leading up to this album, I knew it was going to be a gut punch, to say the very least. This is the closest thing to a traditional folk album he's dropped since Carrie and Lowell, and it's certainly been a while, but on top of that, my God, Sufjan has been through so much lately. Whether it be his hospitalization for Guillain-Barre syndrome, or the recent passing of his partner Evans Richardson, who this album is dedicated to. Throw in some singles leading up to this thing, and I knew that this was going to be an emotional gut punch, so I hope everybody has their tissues ready. Goodbye, Evergreen. It's a hell of a start for this album. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Right off the bat, Sufjan has me right at the edge of his fingertips. Like, I'm right there with him. This is the sad boy folk music that I grew up listening to him. Between his incredibly shaky vocals and the backing vocals behind him, and just how emotional this track gets. Like, this is Sufjan by the book. Now, I will say this is a very Age of Odds intro. I mean, I was completely shocked when that folktronica beat dropped, but I think it's just a really great use of that sound. I mean, don't get used to it. The rest of this thing is pretty stripped down and pretty straightforward, but it makes an impact as an intro. A running start, this track is just, it's home for me. This stripped down instrumental, and just how tender Sufjan's vocals are. They have a way of just warming my bones. I love how unbelievably visual and emotional these lyrics get, which make it just pop so much harder, just with everything going on in Sufjan's life this year. Sufjan's performance is tender, the backing vocals are warm, this track just, it's an emotional one. And just thinking about Will Anybody Ever Love Me is making me tear up a little. I mean, my God. The hype here is real. Ever since I first heard this track as a single, I adored it. It truly does, have a very strong chance of just being an all-time classic from Sufjan. The whispery instrumental, the quiet vocals, the progression here, everything about this track is immaculate. Because no matter how light and airy this track is, the way this track builds and progresses, it is a mammoth tune. I mean, it's not heavy per se, but it's really intense at times. It's easily one of the best tracks of any genre that I've heard this year. Everything That Rises, God, this track is like emotionally draining, but in the best way. Every lyric here on this album just seems to have so much purpose. It's so dense, it's so visual, and we get these very heavenly instrumentals, especially the one on this track, just backing them up. The choir vocals, the religious imagery. Can this slow down like a little bit, please? I mean, I don't know how I would compare this to Carrie and Lowell just because they're very different albums, but man, this is very much so Sufjan reclaiming his throne in this style. Now, I hate to be that guy. There's one or two tracks on here that I just do not vibe with. Like Genuflecting Ghost, for example. Not my favorite track here. From a distance, this sounds very much like the rest of this album. Like, when you break it down, this is a Sufjan Stevens track. But vocally, I'm not into this. It's not nearly the emotional gut punch tour de force that the rest of this album is. I mean, it's not a bad track. There's things about it that I do enjoy. My only argument is that there's very easily 8 better tracks on here. And Javelin, To Have and To Hold, I think this is my worst track here. Sorry. I mean, there certainly are some lyrical highlights. I mean, what else did you expect? But this to me feels really incomplete. I mean, I don't have a problem with a short track and smack dab in the middle of the album. I don't have an issue with that. I just feel like, once again, there's like 8 other tracks here that just hit home so much harder. Like My Little Red Fox, for example, which on an album that is so deeply personable and emotional, this seems to tower over the rest. And that's saying something. I mean, it's just unbearably quiet and unbearably solemn. I mean, that's Sufjan by the books. But his performance and the incredibly visual lyrics just make you not want to look away, not even close. It's absolutely beautiful, and there's just so many layers of mystery on this track. And there's just this quiet intensity to almost this whole album. It's pretty awesome. And on So You Are Tired, this is the album at its quietest. It's sweet, it's somber, it's just so desolate. It's Sufjan and his piano, and that's it. But that's not a bad thing. It's something I've always appreciated when he does. And honestly, his lyrics and just how visual and intense they are, it really makes this track work. Lyrically, as far as I'm concerned, this track is like poetry, like great poetry too. It's a major standout here. And the final 2 minutes, which come complete with these big orchestrations and these swirling group vocals, it's a happening. And we also have shit talk late in the album, and this one, not gonna lie, worried me from a distance. 8.5 minutes. That is not an easy feat, especially on an album like this. But it is an absolute monster of a track, a mammoth of a modern folk tune, and it's impressive in every way. It's light, it's sweet, it may just be the most full of love track here. And yes, that's a big statement, but I stand by it, especially because Sufjan plays it smart on this track. This track doesn't just lock in on a groove and go for 8.5 minutes, it really does progress. Everything about this track comes together and makes for something pretty larger than life. The backing vocals, the dramatic orchestrations that pop in, all of this alongside of Sufjan and his guitar, it's awesome. And over those 8.5 minutes, nothing falters, whether it be Sufjan's passion, his charisma, his songwriting, his vocals, it all kind of just makes for something amazing. And there's a world as a finale. I mean, how else could you end this album? It's just so joyous and sweet and pleasant on the ears. I mean, I love Sufjan's vocals on this track. Probably one of my favorite vocal performances here on the album. And on top of that, I just kind of love the sense of hope on this track and a sense of wonder as well. It's a wonderfully refreshing track as a finale, and it just really does end this album off in a really great way. Yeah, this is Folk Album of the Year, but I could have told you that the second that it was announced that it was dropping. I knew this was going to be an emotional roller coaster of an album for many, many reasons, but Sufjan really does an amazing job of packaging this album together. Yes, it gets very visual, very intense, very emotional. It's not an easy listen, but it is easily going to be one of my favorite albums of the year. The guy did tremendously and really has reclaimed his throne when it comes to this style of music. Yeah, I'm feeling a very, very strong 8, but let me know what you all think down below. If you like the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, friends.